Well, good evening. I'm going to see if I can read us a little bit. Continue our chapter 7, Codependency as the Invader of Intimacy. I liked it's a little dark where you can see downtown. It felt a little intimate. Now let's learn what we don't know together. Where did it go wrong? What happened? Who is responsible? Where is the sense? What does it all mean? Where will it all end? Circles and circles, circle and circles, all filled with confusion. Where did we go off the track? Is it possible to understand? For each couple, the beginning is different. Even so, the process that occurs in the chemically dependent marital relationship is essentially the same. For the starting point, let's take a look at the marriage vows. Most wedding services include the following statements: for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do us part. Maybe that's where all the trouble began. Did you mean what you said when you said it? If you knew at the time that you were going to have not the better but the worse, not the health but the sickness, not the richer but the poorer, and the potential suicide, would the love that you felt have made it worth it? You may say so, but I wonder, if you were more realistic than romantic, you may have interpreted the vows to mean, through the bad as well as the good, assuming that the bad times would be transitory and the good ones permanent. The contract is entered into in good faith. There is no benefit of hindsight. The idealizing that takes place at this time is not realistic. This is true not only for those who will live with chemical dependence, but for everyone. The difference is that the reality continues to be distorted in the chemically dependent relationship, and little by little the couple loses touch with what a happy marital relationship is all about. If the statistics are accurate, and they probably are, understated, then a very large percentage of you grew up in chemically dependent households. This is important to be aware of because you probably had no idea how to develop a healthy marital relationship to begin with. Your early attempts to do it right were built on models that you had not seen or experienced, but rather made up in your own head. I love that the train is getting here at this time. It's awesome. Thus, the fancifulness of the vows would play right into this notion of it will be different for us. By the time help is sought, the expectations have changed a great deal. The sense of self is gone for the chemically free partner. How can I help him or her? The sense of what one can expect in a relationship has shifted. It is no longer Camelot. It is no longer even person to person. The distortion is bizarre. I will stay because ... He doesn't beat me. She doesn't run around. He hasn't lost his job. Imagine getting credit for the behaviors we ordinary mortals do as a matter of course. Even if the worst is true, even if he does beat you, even if she does run around, even if he is no longer working, even with all this, you will then say, but I love him or her. When I respond, tell me what is so lovable, there is no response. The answer doesn't come. The power of being emotionally stuck is far greater than the power of reason. Somewhere between the vows of everlasting wonderfulness and the acceptance of life as a horror story lies the reality. Somewhere hidden in the muck is the truth. It didn't get distorted overnight. Started out on one end of the pendulum and landed on the other. Somehow the process was so gradual that no one saw it happening, and the middle ground went unnoticed. If I ask, what was lovable when you decided to marry, the response comes quickly. It is not unusual to hear answers like, there was a strong physical attraction, and we could talk about anything and everything. He or she was my lover and my best friend. These sentiments are sincere and important. It is important to recognize that people who start out as friends and lovers have something special. It is important, therefore, to recognize that chemical dependency affects everything. It turns lovers and friends into adversaries. Friendship is based on a number of things. It is based on mutual trust and honesty. It is based on the ability to communicate openly. It is based on a sense of understanding and being understood. The chemical dependency eats away at these slowly but surely. The erosion probably begins in the denial phase. At this stage, the drinking is causing problems, but no one wants to face up to it. So the lies begin. First, the lies to self, and then the lies to each other. The dependent person will lie mostly in terms of broken promises. The chemically free person will lie to cover up. The trust begins to break down. True feelings are held back until they become explosive. The honest communication begins to dissolve. The physical relationship is a good indicator of what is happening in the total relationship. The attraction may well continue through the denial phase. It will continue to be a way of sharing, even as the words become more difficult. Not only that, but no one has yet to come up with a better way of making up after a drunken episode. Gradually, the interest in physical intimacy will decline on the part of the chemically free partner. The need to be less vulnerable will start to take over. At this point, the sexual experience may still be technically satisfying, but the emotion is held in check. As in all other aspects, the deterioration continues, and what was a warm and loving experience now becomes a power play and a means of ventilating anger. Go to bed with your bottle, not me. I can't stand the smell. You have to make a choice. Who needs you? It won't be hard to find someone better than you. The gap continues to get greater. No part of the relationship remains unaffected. The climate becomes confused, and the open communication that existed before gives way to suspicion and anger. The underlying concerns are not addressed, and the couple, even though they still care about each other, live a distorted lifestyle. Both partners are being directed by the chemical, one directly and the other indirectly. One is addicted to the chemical, the other is addicted to the chemically dependent partner. The relationship breaks down even further. If the chemical dependency was only destructive to this point, the damage to the relationship is repairable. It is possible to argue it out, and at the very least clear the air. Feelings can be expressed and the lines of communication can remain open, but this is not simple. The insidious illness does not stop here. It separates the couple still further. The chemically dependent partner stops developing emotionally. The chemically dependent partner no longer wants to deal with or confront problems. A large part of any marital relationship is making decisions and resolving shared problems. Where will we go on our vacation? Johnny is failing algebra again. Can we redo the kitchen? And so on with the stuff that life is made of. These issues are no longer shared. The chemically free partner takes over more and more responsibility. Their resentment grows deeper. The gap becomes even greater. A saving grace during difficult times is the support of caring family and friends. This is true here too, at least for a while. But if they have not experienced what you are experiencing, the support will only increase the pain. If they could only understand, the isolation of the chemically dependent couple becomes greater. They become isolated from other people, and they move further and further away from each other. And the sickness continues. The feelings shared are similar. The pain and the desperation are felt by both, but they blame each other. The guilt is felt by both, but the responsibility is placed differently. Once close, you are now strangers most of the time. Occasionally you will find yourselves in the eye of the storm, and you will be so grateful. The idea is that now the drinking will stop, and all will be as it was. It is a shared belief. It is a shared deception. The reality is that the disease will progress. It will get worse, and so will whatever is left of your relationship. The communication deteriorates in forms of anger. The inner feelings evolve into worry, fear, and despair. The feelings are shared, but in isolation. The chemically dependent partner numbs the feelings, and the non-abuser is doubled over in pain, relieved only by anger and occasional fantasies. The fantasy is that the drinking will stop and everything will be as it was in the beginning. Miracle of abstinence. The fantasy is shared. Alcohol will lose its hold and you will live happily ever after. Somehow that is the greatest lie of all, and yet one of the most universally believed. The drinking stops. What does that mean in terms of the relationship? It only means that the focus is lost. It only means that the chemical is no longer the focal point. A huge vacuum now exists. Nothing else happens automatically. The trust that was lost does not come back just because the abuse stops. Just as a history of unfulfilled promises damaged the trust, a new history has to come into play in order to rebuild it. The lies may stop. The lies may stop, but anger does not automatically go away because the drinking stopped. Wait. The lies may stop, but sharing makes one too vulnerable to be open at this point. The anger does not automatically go away because the drinking stops. The feelings that were repressed by the chemical may want to come cascading out. How terribly insecure, how terribly frightened, how hard to share these feelings and expect to be understood. The lines of communication have been cut off. You are two blind people without a road map. Abstinence is not enough. A whole new relationship has to be built. The new starting point has to be different from the original starting point. The starting point this time is best served in learning how to solve mutual problems. It is best served in developing guidelines of how to talk to and not at each other. How can each be heard and understood? The relationship is going to be healthy. It's going to require a lot of hard work. The foundation will require careful and long attention. The attraction that enhances the beginning of relationships is no longer present. The basis now has to be firmly grounded in reality. If both parties are committed to working, it can be more than it would have been had the chemical not entered the picture. If both people are looking for the same things, there is great opportunity for mutual as well as individual growth. If not, the fantasy is over. The relationship is done. Abstinence is not nirvana. Chemical dependency destroys slowly, but thoroughly. Chemical dependency can lead the way to build a healthy marital relationship. Okay, wait a second. I read that wrong. Chemical dependency destroys slowly but thoroughly. Chemical independency can lead the way to build a healthy marital relationship. It's the only winning game in town. And that was chapter 7. I'm going to continue with chapter 8. Sexuality Issues During Recovery by Marilyn Mason. Fear of intimacy is often based on fear of sexuality. Since fear of intimacy is a primary issue in recovery, it is only natural that sexuality is also problematic in recovery. Indeed, many sexual health professionals report that more than half of their clients are in chemically dependent relationships. Conversely, at least half of the people who seek chemical dependency treatment have sexual concerns. In order to present the argument that recovery must be based on a redefinition of sexuality, including its spiritual dimension, we must begin with specific definitions. To those, we must add the assumptions underlying the clinical concerns before moving toward the spiritual dimension. Okay, definitions. In any discussion of sexuality and recovery, two definitions are relevant. Sexuality is, in the broadest sense, the human psychic energy that finds physical and emotional expression in the desire for contact, warmth, tenderness, and love. Chemical dependency is a spiritual disease involving the denial of intimacy. This dependent state results from addiction to chemicals such as alcohol, amphetamines, or hallucinogens. If we can agree on both definitions, we can gain a clearer understanding of the interrelatedness and significance of sexuality and chemical dependency to intimacy and a healthy recovery. Assumption 1. No talk rules govern both sexuality and chemical dependency. The conspiracy of silence and the lack of comfortable language result in the rhetoric of avoidance. It is only natural that professionals who have not been able to break their own no-talk rules will bring them into their work setting. The following example clearly bears this out. During an in-house workshop on sexuality, a treatment center chaplain stated, "Why, I've heard 2,000 fifth steps, and I've never heard a sexual concern yet." On the third morning of the workshop, he rushed in and exclaimed, "I don't know what happened, but I heard 3 sexual concerns last night." Having broken his own no-talk rule, he was for the first time able to give his clients permission to break theirs. Assumption 2. Intimacy is not a steady or fixed state. It is a lifelong search, beginning and ending with dependent states. From developmental psychology, we understand that adolescence is the time when intimacy is paired relationships. Okay, hang on, let me read that sentence again. It's kind of long. From developmental psychology, we understand that adolescence is the time when intimacy is in paired relationships becomes established. It is not surprising then that people in recovery often say that they feel like teenagers. This is quite accurate, considering it was during adolescence when many of them shut down, numbing themselves with chemicals to ease their fear of sexual feelings and to give themselves permission to be sexual. Assumption 3. People can be stripped of their chemicals, but will always be sexual. Many people learned to be sexual by lowering their inhibitions with alcohol or other drugs. When they attempt closeness without relying on chemicals, they often find the experience to be terrifying. Assumption 4. Our love relationships have been based on the pathological model that two persons who pair will become one. Because this model does not allow for separateness in relationships, it has fostered dependency. Therefore, treatment centers face a real challenge in presenting the natural model of today. You will have to battle with the age-old urge to merge, feeling of fusion, that catharsis called love. Assumption 5. Sexuality has long been viewed as an outcome rather than a process. In our product-oriented, shame-based society, we often quantify sexual behaviors and equate quantity to quality. In short, we have focused on genitalia, not sexuality. As a result, individuals have learned how to come together, but most long to learn how to come together. In process-oriented sex, focuses on the together aspect, and for many this causes a greater fear than the more genital approach with non-person sex, sex with nobody home. Sexual competence is indeed helpful, but does not bring love into loving. Songwriter Michael Jackson titled a song, "Love will get you through times of no sex better than sex will get you through times of no love." And assumption 6. A sexual recovery is only as full as the spiritual recovery. Theologian Henry Nouwen, Nouwen, states in Reaching Out that the first stage of spiritual growth is establishing a relationship with the self. Since this is also the first stage of the recovery process, one's sexual acceptance will be primary in recovery. All right, those were all of the assumptions and definitions. All right, sexual concerns in treatment. The sexual concerns most frequently held by clients in treatment are extramarital sex, anorgasmia, erectile dysfunction, gay or lesbian relationships, incest, and sexual addiction. Of course, these same concerns exist in the general population, but their frequency and intensity are greater in the chemically dependent. First one, extramarital sex is often a guilt-ridden issue in treatment and recovery. Many individuals become involved outside their paired relationship or marriage while using chemicals. Many have struggled with their attempts to disprove their dependency or end a relationship by having an affair. Neither partner realizes at the time that he or she is in collusion with the other. Extramarital sex is always at least a two-person affair. One partner does not walk out. One partner does not walk out the door unless the other is knowingly or unknowingly holding it at least partially open. The residual guilt and resentments associated with extramarital sex place great stress on individuals as well as couples in recovery. The guilt and remorse, which may not be disclosed during the early stages of treatment, must be worked through in the recovery process. Anorgasmia, formerly called frigidity. is frequently reported by both recovering women and Al-Anon wives. Sexual guilt and a fear of lack of control have been observed in many recovering women. Both can result in anorgasmia. Many recovering women who are struggling with boundary concerns fear that they might become too loose, become objects, if they allow themselves to be orgasmic, yet they do not want to fake orgasms. Another contributing factor in anorgasmia is a history of forced intercourse. Repressed or active anger is most often anorgasmia's best friend. Orgasms require a total loss of control. It is difficult for a woman to let go of this control until she knows she has some control. Fear and lack of trust have caused many women to become almost asexual. While women can be encouraged to discover their sexual values, the art of self-pleasuring or masturbation seems to be the number one factor in helping these women achieve orgasms. And the next, erectile dysfunction, formerly called impotence, is common among men in recovery. In fact, erectile functioning may not return to normal for up to 12 weeks following treatment. Drugs affect the chemical balance in the blood. It takes time for the body's chemical balance, including the hormone androgenin, to return to its normal level in the blood with abstinence of drugs. Erectile dysfunction is usually secondary. That is, it is situational and can be relieved. Alcohol is not the only drug associated with the high incidence of impotence. One study showed that 50% of heroin addicts had erectile dysfunction. Men who are discouraged about their sexual competence often resume drinking because of their emotional pain regarding their masculinity. In addition, many Al-Anon wives report feeling sexually inferior and inadequate as women because they still believe at some level they are responsible for their husband's erections. When anorgasmia meets erectile dysfunction, it is not unusual for couples to refrain from genital sex for 10 to 12 years following treatment. The next, gay and lesbian relationships are now receiving the respect they long needed in many treatment centers. Some studies show 2 or 3 or every 4 are chemically dependent. Unless the gays and lesbians are allowed to talk openly about their sexual preference, they will continue to confront the same issues they had prior to treatment or involvement. If human dignity is the focus of recovery, as indeed it should be, then it is only natural that all non-exploitive, loving relationships be respected. Many heterosexual individuals fear their same-sex fantasies, thinking this means that they are gay. Often all it means is that they have a broad base for sexual love fantasies. Perhaps what is most needed in treatment is the acknowledgement that we live with the myth that the world is heterosexual. When some individuals are denied the right to express sexual preference, they are also denied the right to recovery with integrity and self-respect. And the next, incest has been a concern of increasing interest, often with staggeringly high incidences of incest reported in treatment centers. Chemical dependency is present in as many as 50% of incestuous families. Some halfway houses have reported that up to 85% of their female clients are incest victims. If we work in the field of chemical dependency, we will be working with incest, both denied and presented. Counselors in many centers feel overwhelmed by all the sexual abuse issues they encounter. Although they have the obligation to allow these issues to surface, they cannot be expected to treat sexual abuse. The whole family needs incest treatment. Treatment centers can ease their work by working with community agencies for referrals and reporting laws. While many counselors state they feel discomfort in violating their clients' confidentiality in treatment, they surely don't want to contribute to this crime by remaining silent. Many incest victims avoid things like AA and/or Al-Anon because they fear being touched. When an incest victim is hugged, he or she often freezes in shame and cannot speak out. Clinicians, too, must remember that our need to nurture can be another person's moment of terror. Of course, not all incest victims are female. Many males have not recognized their victimization. With increased reporting, many more male victims are getting long-needed help. And the next, sexual addiction is still being discovered in many parts of the country and is increasing in dual dependency treatment. Many clients in treatment centers and AA members have been covering the pain of their primary addiction, sexual addiction, with drugs. While the recovery for drug dependence works well for them, they are unable to have serenity because of the remorse and shame brought on by their compulsive sexual behavior. Masturbation, heterosexual and gay affairs, marital rape, or forced intercourse. This is the last page for these 2 chapters. Many members of Sex Addicts Anonymous, a 12-step program, are men, while many women, socialized to have identity through relationships, have joined co-SA groups. The number of women who identify themselves as sexual addicts is also increasing. To be sure, all of these sexual concerns exist in all of society. However, when we talk about them in the context of chemical dependency, we are usually talking about intensification of the behaviors, both the feelings and frequency. Fear of closeness, which is so natural to the human condition, is therefore intensified in the recovering addict's life. In recovery, it is important for professionals to recognize that many of these concerns can be greatly alleviated by talking about them. Talking about a sexual concern in an AA group or a treatment group can indeed be a risk, but not talking is also a risk. In working with recovering alcoholics, many sex therapists and many family therapists have found that greater progress can be made because these people know their feelings, the dimension so basic to a good sexual relationship. And the final paragraph, spirituality and sexuality. One philosopher has stated, to be authentically naked in the 20th century is as difficult as being born again. The rebirth through recovery will necessitate a discovery of the self through the uncovering of the masks which we have hidden behind and the facing of our vulnerabilities. For seeking physical, sexual comfort, we will have to face our sexual shame and begin the process of sexual acceptance. Often, 4th and 5th step work, specifically related to sexual concerns, is helpful. Journaling of feelings and attitude changes is also helpful. If a whole person recovery is the goal, then it is important to recognize that the sexual embodiment through integrating our intellectual, emotional, and physical selves is primary. This can be the beginning of the spiritual dimension of sexuality. The intimacy journey can be exciting. When a recovering person can set limits and establish boundaries, then a clear identity is known to him or her as well as to others. And when these two whole separate selves meet one another, they can enjoy intimacy in a variety of areas, including loving and being loved in sexual harmony. That was the end of Chapter 8. Chapter 9 will be Personality Disturbances Among Codependents by John Wallace. Again, this book only has 12 chapters. So thank you for letting me read this book titled Codependency by about 12 people. Have a beautiful night.